Essentially a side-scrolling shooter, Big Sky Infinity sees the player taking control of a spaceship that utilizes both of the analog sticks on the PlayStation Vita, one naturally covering movement, with the other controlling lasers that serve as your main means of defense against the enemies of outer space. Adding to this is the drill mechanic, which is primarily meant for drilling through planets that block your path, but also doubles as a handy way to quickly shield yourself from incoming projectiles. It also provides the player with 4 powerful attacks for each run that, once unleashed, eradicate every enemy in the vicinity, and is quite handy when you're in a tight spot, which to be honest will be quite often with how many enemies and obstacles the game throws at you. Several modes are available, including Classic, which sees you navigating through levels and upgrading your ship through the use of star bits that you collect whilst playing, also a standard arcade mode that ramps up the difficulty and randomizes upgrades, as well as a pacifism mode that strips you of your weapons and tasks you with using only your dodging and defensive skills. There's a lot more modes to unlock as well as you progress through the game, which really helps the replayability of the experience. Although not the best shooter on the system, it is still worth a go. A Boy and His Blob began life way back in 1989 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. A reimagining of that game eventually made its way to the Nintendo Wii, and then finally the PlayStation Vita. It's a 2D puzzle platformer that sees the player taking up the role of a young boy and an unlikely companion in the form of a blob that fell from the sky. You can communicate with the blob, but only in limited ways, which essentially amounts to either calling him or whistling, and at the beginning of each level the player is dealt jelly beans that have the ability to turn Blob into a variety of different objects that will all play a part in progressing through the journey. For example, one item being a ladder that can be used to reach higher areas, or a cannon that propels you great distances. There are 15 transformations in total, which manages to mix up the gameplay and keep the action feeling fresh. Now the controls are incredibly simple, allowing users of any age to jump into the adventure, which consists of 4 worlds in total, each made up of around 10 levels. It's a pretty sizable experience, with hidden levels also being unlockable upon reaching certain criteria within the game. The hidden levels are where a lot of the game's difficulty lies, with the main adventure being quite straightforward in nature. If you're looking for a moving and heartwarming experience to sit back with, then A Boy and His Blob has got you covered. Air Race Speed is a futuristic racer that manages to share many similarities with the likes of F-Zero and Wipeout, but instead of the focus being on racing others, each racetrack is essentially a tube with obstacles placed all over it, ultimately with the goal of avoiding any collisions that might dampen your times through each track. It results in that one more go feeling many games of this kind invoke so often, which is absolutely perfect for a handheld system. Visually, Air Race Speed presents the action in a full 60 frames per second, allowing the game to translate its incredible sense of speed very nicely. Everything looks smooth and crisp in motion, further contributing to the exhilarating nature of the experience. As with most races, one of the most important aspects has to be the controls, and Air Race Speed gets this spot on, with 2 options available, one being motion and the other being a traditional setup using the physical inputs of the system. But to be fair, motion controls are not the most reliable source of interacting with the game, but it's a nice inclusion for those that prefer it. There is no acceleration button, with your craft being carried along automatically, but the player does have the option to use nitro, resulting in your vehicle reaching some insane speeds. Now there's plenty of good races on the Vita, but none quite as unique as Air Race Speed. Nuclear Throne marries short, pick-up-and-play gameplay with a roguelike twist that results in one of the finest experiences on the Vita. The objective of Nuclear Throne is simple. You're tasked with seeking a throne and ultimately destroying it. Standing in your way are several worlds to overcome, ranging from post-apocalyptic wastelands, caves, and various other locations, which help flesh out the 15 levels that make up each session. Occupying these spaces are a huge, diverse set of enemies, weapons, items, and power-ups to take out or utilize. And at the center of the experience and serving as your way to level up is the rad system. For nearly everything you can take out, you are rewarded with points that can be used to mutate your character, with over 30 mutations available, each offering distinct benefits to the player, such as enhanced aiming, extra health and ammo to name a few. Gameplay wise, everything is quite simple in nature, with both analog sticks serving the action well. At first it can be a bit of a pain getting used to aiming and moving efficiently, but it soon becomes second nature. If you've yet to try out Nuclear Throne, it is now available on several different platforms. starting life in the arcades, many changes were made to the Vita version, including a total rebalancing of the action. The staple gameplay of the series is preserved and translates to the Vita's setup without compromise, and will have you on the edge of your seat thanks to the difficulty that never lets up. It's not completely soul destroying. Soon you'll be pulling off 10-hit combos and last second counters to turn the tide of battles. With a total of 25 characters, there is bound to be someone that will tickle your fancy. Each fighter comes with their own unique style of play, comprised of both moves and weapons that manage to keep the action unpredictable. There's several modes available, including the standard arcade and multiplayer options, but internet play unfortunately does not make an appearance, resulting in you having to find someone with a system and a copy of the game if you fancy taking on other players. It's not a deal breaker, but it would have been a nice inclusion nonetheless. If you're tired of the other fighters available on the Vita, this version of Guilty Gear offers enough to warrant a purchase. Taking place on a devastated space station. As the player, you are tasked with exploring and navigating the environment in order to find a way to escape. Along the way, the protagonist comes into contact with a handheld piece of technology that has the ability to create clones of herself, and secondly, transfer her consciousness to any of them simultaneously. It's an interesting mechanic that really comes into play during the many puzzles that the swapper throws at you. The main objective of the game is to acquire special items known as orbs that are used to activate the various locked doors scattered throughout the environment. These orbs can at times be incredibly tricky to reach, which results in you becoming instantly familiar with the main hook of the experience very quickly. To top this off, the different lights presented in the environment all have different effects upon the device used to clone yourself. Stepping into a blue light will not allow you to create clones, red shall block the swapping ability, and finally purple will take away both of the abilities. A lot of the puzzles incorporate this concept, which manages to keep navigating the environment a truly challenging experience. Originally released for the PC in 2013, Risk of Rain is a procedurally generated platformer that is brutal in both nature and execution. You take the role of a survivor that managed to escape their ship during a crash landing that results with you ending up on a planet where the game's events take place. Now, the story is nothing to write home about, but where Risk of Rain really comes into its own is within its extremely addictive and compelling gameplay. Essentially a side-scrolling platformer, each level is randomly selected with procedurally generated objects littering the environment. Because of this, there is never really a dull moment, as the game is always throwing new challenges at you. Difficulty within the game has quite a unique setup, with its level increasing every 5 minutes of playtime, resulting in you having to adapt on the fly to new enemy types as well as some seriously unforgiving bosses. Progression is also handled very nicely, with each enemy you take out rewarding you with experience points that can be used to develop your character and abilities over the course of the 10 levels that constitute each run. To top this off, if you're playing on your own, each death means game over. All the progression you might have made is stripped away, literally forcing the player to start from scratch. At times it can be a grueling experience, but also one of the most rewarding available on the Vita. A Rose in the Twilight sees the player assuming the role of a young girl known as Rose as she awakens inside a mysterious cursed castle. The objective is to ultimately escape the castle, whilst along the way discovering how Rose actually became trapped there in the first place. Essentially a 2D puzzle platformer, A Rose in the Twilight shares much in common with the various Metroidvania titles we've come to know and love. The castle is broken up into various rooms that all manage to contribute to the overall daunting atmosphere of the experience. Exploring the world soon becomes a real joy as you make your way through it, and as you do, you'll start to notice that the entire castle is monochrome in appearance, with the only other colour present being red. This ties into the game's central hook, which is the use of blood. It sees Rose having the ability to absorb the blood from objects and utilise it within the environment. That ends up becoming essential in order to progress through the castle. Now, death plays a big role in the journey, with the game actually forcing you to sacrifice yourself at certain points that really manage to deliver some truly disturbing but at the same time moving scenes throughout the story. If you've yet to try A Rose in the Twilight, then now is the perfect time. The first thing that will strike you about TXK is the incredibly striking visual style that shares many similarities with the previous games from the mind of Jeff Minter, such as Tempest 2000 and Space Draft. The game sees you placed upon the edge of a geometrically shaped grid, tasked with taking out the hordes of enemies that try to cross to your side of the playing field. To even the odds, TXK throws various items at the player in the form of power-ups that even the odds against your targets, such as increased rates of fire. It becomes apparent quite early on that utilizing utilizing these power-ups is essential to successfully completing each level. The standout aspect of the experience though has to be the difficulty, which is uncompromising by nature. It manages to slowly ease in new players to the action, and you're never presented with an obstacle that is impossible to overcome, rather your skill level being the only thing getting in the way of progression. But once everything clicks, it really starts to shine. The rewarding feeling of taking out waves of enemies in style soon becomes the central reason to keep on coming back time after time. As mentioned earlier, the visuals really stand out, especially when playing on the Vita's OLED screen. Every particle burst, neon color and background comes to life in a sort of psychedelic fashion that the game can really call its own. To top this off, the heart-pounding and at times surreal techno soundtrack complements the style of the experience, resulting in something truly special that needs to be on every Vita owner's machine. Ninja Senki DX harkens back to the many platformers of old. If you have fond memories of the likes of Mega Man and the early Mario titles, you'll feel right at home with the experience delivering more of the same, but that in no way is a bad thing. Each run is comprised of 16 levels that sees you travelling across a set of varied locations such as dungeons, mountains and forests, with each level possessing a variety of enemies which are thrown at the player, from shotgun wielding nutjobs to immensely energetic ninjas. To even the playing field, you possess an endless supply of ninja stars that grant you the ability to strategically make your way through each level and take down enemies from a distance if needs be. Controlling your character is fluid and responsive, which in all honesty is quite essential when it comes to a platformer. You possess a double jump that grants you the ability to successfully guide your way through some tricky areas, which also comes in handy when encountering enemies. But the real star of the show has to be the boss battles, which really add an extra layer of challenge to the experience. They are all completely unique in design, each requiring precise strategies to overcome. Ninja Senki DX is an incredibly well crafted game, which has clearly been developed with the love of all platformers in mind. If you've yet to give it a go, Ninja Senki DX will offer everything you expect and more.